Hey guys, I'm going to do one more quick screencast to cover something that I think is sort of important when you're talking about doing Markdown or switching to plain text sort of as your workflow, which is the other stuff that I talked about on the previous video, which I will link to. So what I'm going to talk about now is you want to switch to plain text. You want to start using that, whether it's Markdown or just plain text or whatever. You got your workflow, you're grabbing your new software stuff and you're grabbing new apps and checking all this stuff out, and you look at this massive library of stuff that you have from before you had this epiphany, and it's a little bit overwhelming because you're looking at all these doc files and RTF files and everything, and you're thinking to yourself, what am I going to do with all that stuff? The good news is that you can switch all this stuff to Markdown. It's not nearly as painful as it used to be. In fact, it's not terribly painful at all. For the longest time, and I want to make sure and mention this because this is sort of the granddaddy of tools for this kind of thing, is for the longest time, what you did when you wanted to move stuff from really anything into Markdown or a bunch of other different formats was you used Pandoc, which, as you can see from the website, is a universal document converter. It is super cool. It is also not necessarily the simplest thing in the world to set up. It's got some steps, it's got some dependencies that it needs to do various things, but it's fantastic. I mean, it'll take damn near anything and switch it into something else. So you can take your Markdown stuff and turn it into an EPUB, and take your EPUBs and turn it into whatever. The basic gist of it is that you need to have your files in something that's sort of XHTML compliant, and once you've got that, you can turn it into a bunch of different things. That's great. If you're interested in doing that, if you feel like you've got the sort of setup chops to do that kind of thing, then do that. Pandoc is great. I certainly think it's awesome. I'm not using it a lot right now because I found some other ways that I like doing this kind of thing. So I have things that I want to switch into Markdown that aren't in Markdown right now, and I'm too lazy for Pandoc. What do I do? Luckily, there are solutions that are available for me. One of them, and the main one that I tend to use a lot, especially when I'm switching over old Word docs and things like that, is I use IWriter. IWriter is fantastic for this. If you're in IWriter, you can do some really wicked stuff in there where you can just do file and import, and it gives you a list of possible things that you can import. I'm going to go, if I can, to the same thing was that. I think it was in little things. Yeah, I'm going to go in there. And it shows all the things I can import. It like conveniently highlights the things that are available for me to grab. You will note, however, and this is kind of a big deal, it highlights the docx files, but it doesn't highlight the doc files. And the reason for that is that with docx, Microsoft moved sort of the guts of their file formats to be based on XHTML. What that means is that IWriter can read it and do stuff with it. It can't do anything with the doc files. So, for instance, if I have this, I had this file as a doc. So what I did in order to be able to turn it into a Markdown file was I opened it up in Word and then resaved it as a docx file. It doesn't really do anything except to save it as a docx file, translates it into XHTML, which means that now IWriter can read it. I open that up in IWriter, and boom, I've got my file. I've got exactly what I need for everything I'm going to do. And now I didn't. This particular one doesn't actually have much in the way of formatting, so it doesn't really. It doesn't really show off what IWriter is capable of. But trust me, it's actually pretty cool, and we'll grab a bunch of stuff, translate a bunch of stuff that you wouldn't expect it to be able to translate. It doesn't handle super complicated files very well. So if you're if you got a file with a bunch of tables, I'm just saving this as an MD file just to sort of get it done. It doesn't necessarily do tables really well, and it gets a little crazy with footnotes. So if you have a file, I happen to have a really, really long story that's got a tremendous number of footnotes in it because apparently I hate my life, and that doesn't translate into Markdown very well. if I had started writing it in Markdown, I could totally do those footnotes and I could totally go to town with that. But unfortunately, that's not how I did it. And this was quite a while ago. And I'm trying to switch it over, the footnotes just sort of go away. So that's not being captured very well when I switch it over into DocX. So I just kind of have to lump it. If I want to keep working on that file, I'm going to have to continue to use Word, which isn't great news, or I need to translate over, or maybe I'll do what all my workshop people tell me to do and get rid of the damn footnotes because they annoy people. So I can do that too. So that's one tool, and that's what's really great for moving over this thing. Just save the stuff over to DocX, and once you have it in DocX, it's a simple matter to use IWriter, and actually a couple of Pandoc is free, which is nice. And you can switch stuff over into Markdown or text or whatever really quickly. If you've got other stuff that you want to save, I recommend, this is written by Brett Terpstra, who writes a bunch of other really fantastic stuff for Markdown. But he's got this great site that's basically based on Marky, what he calls Marky the Markdownifier, which will translate pretty much any website that you point it at into Markdown. Grab the URL, paste it in here, hit go, and you get a... well, that one's not going to work though, because my page apparently breaks this thing. But on a normal website that's not stupid, you paste the URL in and it gives you a lovely little Markdown thing. And the other thing that's really awesome is he's got all these bookmarklets down here at the bottom that you can put into your browser, which I've got a couple right up here. And this is great workflow stuff if you're trying to capture things and you want to capture it into your Dropbox in a Markdown format with one click of a button. It is fantastic. So I'll give you an example here. We'll go over here to this site, this article on somebody who started to live in a tiny house, because I kind of love these things and I think they're great. So I have this article. I want to save it. I can do this a couple different ways. If I just want to see the Markdown and do something with it, maybe over an IWriter or whatever, I'll click on the readability little thing that Marky gave me, and it gives me the whole page in Markdown. All the links, and there's all the footnotes are down at the bottom with all the links to the other articles and the images, and that's super great. That's fantastic. The other thing that's really cool, which I can do instead, is this other fantastic little button called Clip to NV Alt, which does exactly what you think it would do. It grabs all that Markdown, saves it to NV, and boom, it's an NV Alt, where I can just fiddle with it, and it's saved right now. Boom, it's in my Dropbox. And I didn't have to do anything. I had to hit one button. So all of that stuff where you're like copying and pasting and saving HTML files and translating HTML over to Markdown, blah, none of that. One button, whatever you want to see, the whole website saved into your Dropbox in Markdown, clean plain text, ready to mess with all the links down at the bottom. And I want to look at it in something else, so I'm going to go over and I'm going to edit this in, if I do it in IWriter. Right, so there you go. And I've got this thing to just mess with and do all the things that I want to do with it. So that is most of what I use to translate stuff into Markdown. There are other ways. If you do a little bit of Googling, it's not too difficult to find the stuff that you need to find. There's a great little script that you can find that will translate your Google Docs over into Markdown. I've used that a couple times. I have that saved up into Google Docs. It's not for the faint of heart, but it works. Absolutely works. What else is there? There's, well, I mentioned Pandoc. I mentioned Marky. Basically, between those things, you should be able to point at pretty much any document that you've got that's in a pretty common text format and switch it to Markdown without too much pain.